Your Creative Push, episode 164.
Go out there and get it. If you want something that badly, you need to go for it every single day of your life, every moment.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Stuart Holland. Stuart is a visionary realism artist currently based in Boise, Idaho. Working in primarily charcoal and watercolor, Stuart's work often depicts ethereal figures as they explore and engage with stark landscapes riddled with enigmatic natural and artificial features. Drawing influences from sources like psychology, various spiritual traditions, psychedelics, and quantum physics, Stuart's drawings and paintings explore the timeless concepts of light and urge viewers to contemplate their innate relationship with self, nature, and the universe at large. And Stuart, first of all, thanks, man, for coming on the show. I guess let's start there, because that's a lot. Where did that kind of style and your theme kind of come from?
So first off, thanks for having me on the show. I'm super excited to be here.
Of course, man.
Not physically, but so yeah, my work has kind of taken an interesting turn. It's really recently, my work has been influenced a lot by some ayahuasca ceremonies that I participated in last spring in Peru. And in light of that, I sort of developed a new appreciation and a deeper curiosity to understand the world and the nature of reality and sort of mediate my sense of purpose and how I fit into the grand scheme of things.
That makes a lot of sense from what I hear about ayahuasca. I really want to participate in ayahuasca ceremony as well. It just hasn't kind of worked out yet. And I guess it's one of those things that kind of finds you, or, you know, it kind of seems to happen whenever the time is right. So can you tell us kind of briefly about what happened in those ayahuasca sessions? Yeah,
so to get into it briefly, later, if the listeners want to go, I actually wrote a good number of pages kind of as my first-hand account of the 4 ceremonies that I did, and they can be found on my website. But each ceremony was really, really different, and when you go to ceremony, they tell you that you should come with a particular intention. And with ayahuasca, there's a lot of people that come to it seeking some sort of healing from whether it's childhood trauma or substance abuse. It's got a remarkable track record with getting people off hard drugs. Luckily, I was there mostly just to learn. I didn't have any sort of pressing things that I wanted to address from my past. I was there to learn primarily. And so first off, my first ceremony, I wanted to learn kind of about like the true nature of the universe. Mm-hmm. So in that first ceremony, I got a glimpse of the universe kind of showing me metaphorically how it functions. Ayahuasca is a very metaphorical teacher in the sense that it is a great mediator between these concepts that are so grand and vast beyond our sort of subjective experiences, and using our pre-existing like mental, cultural frameworks that we each have, and using that to really allow us to understand these concepts a little bit better. And so in that experience, I had a vision that kind of illustrated the universe as this autonomous, self-sustaining entity that what I saw was this immaculate sort of padlock Rubik's Cube contraption with all of these infinitely complex and interlocking parts that it has a sort of incomplete knowledge of how to bring about a harmonious balance in terms of what to implement, where and when to bring about that balance. And it just sort of ticks away trying to figure that out until it finds it. That balance is never going to be a total permanent thing. And so when that balance gets thrown out of whack again, it also has these sort of mechanisms that will use that failure to produce an opportunity to reestablish that balance.
For people listening to that, I always have this issue whenever I try to talk about psychedelics in a kind of promotive way. I feel like some people are very dismissive that have never even thought about it, but it's one of those things where you have to kind of see to believe. And your story makes me like very excited to try it, because I think the purpose of being a human being is to kind of think about these things, is to think about the fact that we are just this little speck on a speck, like in this giant vast universe, and like who the fuck knows what is actually going on and why we're here. And I think it's like what we should be doing as human beings. We should be thinking, like looking up at the stars and thinking, what the hell? And looking into ourselves and thinking, what the hell? And I don't know, I think that it is an important thing to do, as I said, as a human being, but also to incorporate that into art as well. So how have you been able to kind of take that experience and put it into your art? Has your style completely changed since then?
Yeah, it was a pretty radical change, actually. Like now I primarily work in charcoal, and throughout the first like 23 years of my life, I did not have an affinity for it at all. Even when I was in art school and taking, figure drawing classes with charcoal, I wasn't bad by any means, but I didn't feel that I had a grasp of how to make it do what I wanted it to, and really sort of have a specific voice through that medium. So one thing that's kind of come out of my experiences with psychedelics have been sort of attaching a philosophical motive behind using it, the charcoal as a medium. And it has to do with that concept of timeless light and darkness. Charcoal in itself is made from the burnt remains of living matter. So for me, it represents a sort of alchemical transmutation from light to darkness. So you had the living thing that was light, then died and became sort of darkness. Then someone took that, burned it, and created light. And now I'm using that resulting darkness to talk about light again in a weird sort of narrative. But I feel it's very conducive to sort of the thematic elements that I'm working with.
That's really poetic too. I love that analogy and thinking of it that way. Was that a struggle then? You said you didn't really work in charcoal too much. So then, I guess it felt natural to kind of do that. But was it difficult at all to kind of start with this new medium?
It definitely took some learning and trying to like experiment on how to get certain textures and certain elements to come out from the actual process. And it seemed very like out of the blue to me when I first started doing it, but I actually have a printmaking emphasis from my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. Like my senior project before I graduated was a series of large scale woodcuts. So despite not liking charcoal, I actually had been working with sort of like stark black and white and working in these like intermediate areas to create value. It was kind of attached to a different philosophical and like artistic concept at that time. But that sort of reductive process, so you take the block, which when you start off, if you were to print it, it would be entirely black. So it's a very reductive process carving out these areas that are going to create the lighter values in the whites. And one of the things that I realized with my previous handling of charcoal is that I perceived it mainly as an additive process, when really there is a sort of like equal push and pull between additive and reductive. And so now when I work with charcoal, I use erasers just as much as I use charcoal on the paper.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that you found like your kind of final point, not your final style, but do you feel like you're going to continue to like evolve as an artist and continue to move on to different things?
Yeah, I've always been meaning to oil paint and learn, because in my printmaking degree, I took a lot of drawing classes. That's been a real staple in my artistic past, and never really had the opportunity to delve into taking oil classes, but that's something that's definitely on my to-do list in the next little bit. But I'm also really open to expanding my medias to embrace new technologies. Earlier this summer, I read Aldous Huxley's Heaven and Hell, and it sort of talked about the mediating of the psychedelic experience and the role of art, and how through different paradigms in history, certain mediums have had an ability to most effectively convey this sort of transportive nature of the psychedelic experience. And using that to pair with technology in the most recent forms to create that, I would really love to get into working with holograms and sort of using that as a medium to facilitate a facsimile of a psychedelic experience in a sort of immersive art installation.
Do you think that is it possible to do that right now, or do you have to kind of wait for the technology to kind of be more accessible?
From what I've researched, the technology to do what I've already started working with in my mind is there. The thing is that it's not necessarily the cheapest form of art that you can get into.
Right.
And there's, big screens to project stuff on are not cheap. And so at this point, it comes down to just getting the funding and putting together a proposal where I can hopefully get some additional funds to supplement a project like that.
Very cool. Well, I'm very excited to see where that goes. But yeah, I know that it sometimes, technology is pretty crazy how like exponentially cheap it gets quickly. So hopefully it'll be right around the corner for you. Now, before we kind of get into like talking about resistance and stuff like that, I was wondering, was there like a resistance for you coming back from the jungle and having this kind of shift, not only in style, but in just kind of your mental state, I guess, what your mental opinion of what the universe is all about? Was there any resistance from that with family, friends, and current people that were into your work?
It's kind of funny. I went down to Peru with several of my cousins, and neither of our sets of parents knew why we were going to the jungle. We hadn't really let them in. Both of our sets of parents were fairly religious at one point and kind of conservative, and that has shifted a little bit. And I wasn't sure how I was going to tell my parents that I went to the jungle to do this psychedelic ceremony where I had the most spiritual experience of my life when they had been, making me go to church for 18 years of my life. But it's something that I couldn't not share with them. And they were very, very open and accepting to it. And it was a very tangible change for a lot of people when I came back, and they're like, wow, that was something did happen there. And it wasn't so much a resistance as much as it was a very strong, I came back incredibly motivated and just full of inspiration and really riding this sort of afterglow high in light of this, radical change in perspective. So instead of having it be a resistive thing, it was something that really sort of propelled me and jettisoned me into the trajectory that I am now.
I got you. Yeah. Cause those kinds of experiences do change you, and it's hard to explain, but it does have a way of kind of resetting, almost, or making, just putting you in a different place, where you, like you said, you were going to understand the universe, but I think it's almost impossible to not understand the universe and our existence more when you have these experiences. So congrats to you for being jettisoned into your new trajectory. I think that's a really good way to put it, because it does kind of blast you off in a way towards a new, a shift in mindset and a shift in kind of trajectory. So good for you, man.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Because your art is insane too. It's so good. And I think it does effectively kind of take the viewer there, if that makes sense. I think you are very successful in what you're trying to do. So congrats.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Of course, man. So, all right, let's talk about other resistances, maybe that you had earlier in your art career or now, as far as actually physically, sitting down, doing the work and kind of getting through it. Do you have any of those?
I guess the cliche answer is self-doubt. I once saw this little illustration that was a Venn diagram about being an artist, where one circle was crippling self-doubt and the other was absolute narcissism, and the overlapping area is where it is to be an artist.
Right.
But really, it's so hard to sort of be a creative person in a world that doesn't necessarily favor creative endeavors. I mean, everybody appreciates art and music, but, everyone has had an experience where someone's going to be like, well, like, what are you going to do with that, that art degree? Or you're going to be in a band. Like, what's your real job going to be? Like, that can be a really taxing thing, and really maintaining the confidence and reinstating to yourself, at least, that like, this is a legitimate dream, and it is legitimate despite people having various views on how valid or achievable it is. You just need to really follow your dreams, like ardently commit yourself to it. And being resilient to that sort of like casual criticism is something that is going to be pervasive through the first, several years of your career as you start to really establish yourself. But aside from that, I think some of the most pressing resistances have been points in my life where I have not had a creative space, sort of like sanctuary of sorts, where I could be isolated enough and be able to focus on my work and be unaffected during that span of time from what else is going on around me. When I first moved out of my parents' house, I moved into a house with several friends. And over the course of 3 years, it sort of became a community punk house with like an open door policy where we had people over all the time, coming and going kind of as they pleased. That was during a time in my degree where I didn't have very many art classes. And so I was very limited on outside space and studio space to really sit down and work. After a certain point, having an environment that's so inundated and buzzing with people doing all sorts of things. And sometimes it was nice because you have a bunch of people interested in what you're doing and you get to share that with them. But at the same time, it can be very debilitating to the creative process not having that. So that was probably the biggest resistance that I've had in the past couple of years, which it seems pretty trivial. And I'm sure I'm headed towards some more resistances as I press forward, but having that creative space is crucial for me.
Yeah, that sanctuary. I think a lot of people can relate to that in various situations, whether it's, being inundated with work at their quote actual jobs, their real job, as you mentioned before, and that finding that sanctuary is really important. And the other thing that you mentioned about, having to chase your dream while all the naysayers are saying, well, what are you really going to do? I think it's a crappy thing about kind of our existence is that creative people have to call what they want to do a dream, because like it's the reality is what all the naysayers are saying, because that's what like most of the world is doing, because that's just like the standard thing to get a job and clock in and clock out and just be, quote, financially secure. But I think that we need to try to promote like a shift in thinking about pursuing a creative passion, not being a dream, but being a reality, right from the get-go, to have that be like that. Because I feel like that type of thing holds so many people back and sets people down, a path of, that standard thing that everybody else is doing, just going down that like very strong river.
Absolutely.
And just being stuck in that. So I don't know how to. Maybe everybody has to do psychedelics, but
yeah.
So would you have any suggestions for people that don't have that kind of sanctuary you mentioned?
The biggest part is it might take a lot of work for you to find a sort of niche area, but really investing some time and possibly some money if you have to find a space that's outside of your home or outside of your already existing accessibility, it's worth the investment, because if you don't have a space, then you aren't going to be able to foster that sort of creative energy, and it's going to end up just really limiting you. And it's almost like wanting to grow a garden, but not setting aside a little plot of land or a little section of your yard to do it. And you're not going to sort of reap the fruits of your efforts if you don't do that initial step. So just look around, just really commit yourself to establishing that, because for your own sort of sanity and creative health, it will make a world of difference. Even if it's just like a little room in your house. Like, I can't remember who else was on your show recently that talked about just whether it's a sign on your door that you close that just says, I do not wish to be disturbed during this set of hours, Just please leave me to my work. There's something that you can do in just about any situation and any budget to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not only having a sign, but just having all of your loved ones kind of be on the same page and understanding why you need that time, and like to not take it personally. And it's not like you're trying to escape them. It's just that you're trying to almost escape yourself to get into that, sanctuary is the only word I can think of because it's the perfect word. Just where it's you and your art, and you don't have to think about all those other distractions, all those other things. It can be just you and yourself.
Yep. It's a great opportunity as like a sort of self-reflective, meditative opportunity to like really get to know yourself. And I see the creative process and, creating something, bringing it to fruition and like manifesting it in front of you is a very sacred ability that we have in a way. And it needs the sort of like reverence and the opportunity to flourish, almost like going to a chapel, I guess, or a temple.
Absolutely. It's that self-reflective thing where you can actually figure out, what's going on inside of yourself, what you actually think about the world, and the only time you're able to actually get that out. So I think it is important to maintain that. And the only way to maintain that is to continue to have it be a daily practice and something that you can, kind of escape to.
Yeah. Along the same lines, like the creative endeavor is not like for weekend warrior types. Like it does need to be consistent in an actual practice that you implement on a daily basis. Otherwise, it's never going to manifest fully in your life.
Yeah. It has to be like a constant thing on your mind, I guess. It has to be a part of you.
Oh, yes.
Do you have a worst or a best creative moment?
I haven't had a worst one. And maybe I need to like brace myself for when that doldrum happens in the near future or whatever. But I think the best one has been from traveling and from psychedelics. I'm a pretty avid traveler, and as part of being a creative person, a big component is feeding yourself with inspiration and opportunities to really expand your perspective. Like I call these experiences liminal experiences, where you jar yourself from your sort of normal state of being and allow yourself to experience novelty. So every time I go on a trip, I like when I went to Peru, or I went to the Redwoods recently and went to Mexico to swim with whale sharks. Each time I go on these trips, I see it as a sort of research opportunity where I allow myself to be immersed in something that's an entirely new experience that will ultimately yield new creative brain food where it will impact my work in some way. And it always does. It hasn't let me down yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Novelty. You must like Terrence McKenna.
Yeah, just a little bit.
No, I think that the travel thing is super important, and yeah, kind of, we've talked about it, on the show a lot, the idea of being able to travel to new places. It does kind of expand your horizons, not to be too cliche, but to also, make time slow down in a way. It like gives you that novelty, that new experience. Whereas, when you're just going through your everyday business, the same thing every day, you're not kind of expanding your mind, and you're not, getting anything new, any kind of new inspiration to take you on as you said before, which I love, the new trajectory.
Absolutely.
Do you have a formula for balancing your time?
I was afraid that this question was going to come up. Sadly, I am definitely on the less rigorously designed sort of itinerary for my days. I spend a lot of time in the studio. It's not necessarily scheduled at a particular time each day. So I'll spend a good 6 hours in the studio a day, depending on if I have to work that day or, other administrative components of being an artist. But I don't have a whole lot of a social life these days. I'm a very big night owl. My real job is I'm a bartender. And so the nights that I'm not working at the bar, I'm in the studio working till like 3 a.m. And I also love to sleep That's probably one of my like biggest daily resistances. Like I love to dream. I've got a dream addiction. And so in between, waking up and going to sleep, there's 6 hours that I dedicate to the studio, take care of myself and go to the gym every day. Beyond that, do a lot of reading, a lot of like research to sort of provide myself for that ongoing creative sustenance.
It's interesting you bring up the dream thing, because I literally, I work nights too, and I wake up late, and it's 4 p.m. right now. I just woke up like an hour and a half ago, but I had my first lucid dream last night.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah, I was watching this video about how to like bring on lucid dreams, and it's like this thing where you move your index and middle finger like up and down like you're playing piano keys, but you don't actually move them. And I watched that like last week, and then I was in a dream, but I was like about to go to sleep in my dream. So it was like a dream in a dream, and I was like doing that thing in my dream, and it worked.
That's incredible.
So I had a very boring lucid dream though. I just like jumped around in this like big auditorium, and it was pretty incredible experience, but I can't wait to do it again and actually do something very interesting, like go out into outer space or something. I don't know. But yeah, it's very interesting you bring that up, because I love my dreams too. I love my sleep. So do you gain anything from your dreams? Like, have you ever been inspired to create a piece of art, or has that ever brought you down a certain path?
Yes and no. My dreams are typically pretty realistic, not oftentimes venturing into the like fantastical, like, oh, I went and I like flew across the cosmos sort of fashion. Mm-hmm. But I mean, each night you dream, it's like having a mini life. And so I don't draw a whole lot of specific imagery from my dreams. I'm actually trying to teach myself how to more consistently lucid dream as well. And I actually listened to a podcast that was interviewing a lucid dream expert specialist that was talking about how he knows a good number of creatives that once you master maintaining the lucid dream state, because it's kind of fragile if you excite yourself too much, can jar you right back out. So once you sort of learn how to navigate that and maintain it, you can start to engage more with these entities of your subconscious that you encounter. He said that he has a couple friends, like one who was a writer who was able to query his subconscious and be like, I have this novel that I'm writing. Like, how should I wrap up this storyline? And his subconscious almost materialized the resolved story plot in front of them. And so hopefully that's one of the reasons that I am super interested into lucid dreaming, is like implementing that as part of a creative practice where I'm already very interested in psychedelics, and sort of using that as a generative source of more direct inspiration would be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And also just dreams are one of those things that I think about all the time now too, how psychedelic dreams are. Like, why do we all have to like check out like every day? Like, why does every living thing have to do this thing where they shut off and go to this other place? I think it's like one of the weirdest things. Just like, I was saying that people don't look up enough at the sky and think, like, what are we doing here? It's the same thing, like looking inwardly, like, what is this? What's going on here? Like, where are we going, and why is this necessary?
Yeah, why is it necessary? And like when we wake up after a full night's sleep where you lived oftentimes a lot longer than a day's worth of time in your dream, you wake up and you're like, oh, I feel totally refreshed and ready to go to my more mundane life.
Right.
That's like a restorative thing.
Yeah. I hate it. I wish I could dream all day. Just go into Inception.
Yep.
Before we let you go, I was wondering, do you have, I'm sure you do, a bunch of favorite books, but like any books that you think could help creative people that are struggling with their creativity, or movies or YouTube clips or anything else?
I'm a big Aldous Huxley fan. And I think Heaven and Hell and The Doors of Perception were definitely really pivotal in sort of giving me a good place to start and really start to contemplate the things that I wanted to tackle. It was funny because I knew that The Doors of Perception was largely about like the psychedelic experience, but even more so, it had a lot to do with like art history. And as he's going through describing these things that he was taking appreciation for. I was finding myself having to go and do Google searches and remind myself of these moments in art history that utterly inspired him just out of sheer beauty. And so that has been a really strong facet of my inspiration. Another one of my favorite books. So I read a book recently called Dark Nature that's written by a naturalist back in the 90s that sort of was seeking to explore the idea of evil and sort of redefine it in sort of like a biological and psychological context. Sort of wondering where, like, is there a purpose for evil in a new context in our natural systems and in our interpersonal relationships and with the relationship that we have with our environment. And it was an incredible sort of cross analysis that distilled this awesome new perspective on why there are things that sort of cast the balance of the universe or of our lives or interactions off kilter. And that kind of gave me a new appreciation and a newfound resiliency to when you meet resistances and things that seem really ugly in your life, and being able to take that in stride and really be like, well, this is something now that I have to deal with, but I can deal with it, and it's not the end of things. Like it's a mutable, transformable thing that I can turn into something beautiful. I think that's been another one of my huge influences, not only just in my creative practice, but in my life in general.
Very cool. Yeah, that's very important. And we'll have that all linked up at yourcreativepush.com/Stuart Holland. Stuart, it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today and just give them your best words of advice and really push them to pursue their creative passions.
All right, listener. My advice to you would be to always be honest with yourself. People often say that you're your own worst critic, and I feel like that's overemphasized more so than like you can also be your own best critic as long as you are honest with yourself. Like, be honest with your failures and also be honest with your successes. And in that dialogue, you will really set yourself up for further success and growth, and be okay with there being failures because they're inevitable and part of life. And also just really go out there and get it. There was an episode that you had recently that talked about magic and the universe being a reactive, living thing. If you want something that badly, whether it's being a dancer or an artist or a musician, you need to go for it every single day of your life, every moment. It's not going to be one single decision that makes that transformation happen in your life, but it's going to be a small series of decisions that you make throughout your day, throughout your week, over the course of a year. But really commit yourself to being honest with where you are, where you want to be, and being honest with your commitment to making up the disparity between those two places and committing yourself to consistently making that happen on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Say it out loud, say it proud, and then just go for it. Just put your head down and just go for it. And as you said, it is really important to be honest with yourselves, the positives, the negatives, and to not be too hard on yourself, but to also be gracious with yourself. And it's a tough balance, but it's something that you can get used to by doing it every day. The more you do it, the more you kind of get used to it.
Yep, it's a skill, and it's almost like a muscle that you need to consistently work out in order to grow. Otherwise, it will start to fade into apathy.
Stuart, this is awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it, dude.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And you can find Stuart on his website, stuarthollandart.com. And on Instagram, he is _grave_witness_. But we'll have all that linked up at the show notes page. Again, yourcreativepush.com/Stuart Holland. That's STUARTHOLLAND. Stuart, thanks again, brother.
Thank you.
Oh man, I loved that conversation with Stuart. Thank you again to Stuart for coming on the show. He said a quote there at the end that definitely bears repeating. He said, "It's not going to be one single decision that makes transformations happen in your life, but it's going to be a small series of decisions that you make throughout your day, throughout your week, and over the course of a year." It's so true. It just shows that it's a consciousness shift that you need to make to become the person that you want to be. Whether it's with your creativity or anything else that you want to change in your life, it's a daily change. It's something that you actually have to do every single day. Sometimes it does make a big life decision to say, okay, I'm going to do this, but then you have to continue to do it. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, myself included. It is tough to do it every single day, especially when the going gets tough. But there is no magic pill. There is no formula, even though I keep asking about, the formula for balancing your time. There is no secret formula. It all comes down to just doing it every single day. But this was such a breath of fresh air. I love to be able to talk with people like Stuart about really interesting topics like psychedelics and lucid dreaming. If you yourself have had any experiences with lucid dreaming or psychedelics, especially if they have to do something with your art or your creativity, and you'd like to share, please hit up the show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/164. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences, or if you want to, you can hit me up on Instagram or Facebook, Your Creative Push, or just shoot me an email if you don't want to make it public, youngmin@yourcreativepush.com. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And if you're interested in learning more about Stuart's personal ayahuasca experiences, definitely head to his website, stuartholland.com, to read about his experiences. Very interesting stuff. And if you were interested in that lucid dreaming podcast that he was talking about, that's the Human Experience Podcast, episode 69. We'll have all of that linked up again at yourcreativepush.com/164. That's all I've got for you today. Hopefully you're inspired to go and get your work done this weekend. We will be here for you all next week with new episodes if you need the push again. But for now, go get some amazing work done. I love you all, and we will see you on Monday. Bye, everybody. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast. I always have this issue whenever I try to talk about psychedelics or in a kind of promotive way. I feel like some people are very dismissive that have never even thought about it, but it's one of those things where you have to kind of see to believe. And your story makes me like very excited to try it, because I think that hold on, there's a helicopter flying overhead. Obviously. Could you hear it?
Yeah, just a little bit. They heard about illegal substances and they're on to you.
That's awesome.